Welcome to World Prism. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The world is changing fast. Every day, headlines remind us that the balance of power is in constant motion, shaped by forces both seen and unseen. Old alliances and trade routes are being upended, replaced by fierce competition and confrontation. The familiar patterns of global cooperation are giving way to a new era of rivalry, where economic interests and national priorities often clash. The United States and China are redrawing the map of global power, sending shockwaves across every continent. Their rivalry is not just about economics or military might, but about influence, technology, and the very rules that govern international relations. This isn't just a story for politicians, it's shaping economies, security, and daily life everywhere. From boardrooms to living rooms, the consequences of these shifts are felt in jobs, prices, and even the stability of entire regions. Under President Trump, America's foreign policy has shifted to an America First doctrine, challenging the foundations of NATO and global cooperation. Long-standing partnerships are being tested and allies are forced to reconsider their roles on the world stage. Meanwhile, China wields its economic power to reward friends and punish rivals, forcing nations to choose sides. Its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative is reshaping infrastructure and investment across continents, deepening its reach and influence. Europe faces tough demands from Washington, while emerging economies like Mexico discover their trade ties can become vulnerabilities overnight. The pressure to adapt is immense, as countries navigate a landscape where alliances can shift rapidly. The rules-based order built over 70 years is under strain, as economic warfare and shifting allegiances define a new era. Institutions that once seemed unshakable now face unprecedented challenges and uncertainty. The events of recent months are just the opening moves in a turbulent new chapter of global politics. As the world watches, the shifting sands of power promise to reshape our future in ways we are only beginning to understand. NATO, once focused on defending Europe, now faces unprecedented demands from President Trump. He's calling for all members to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP and join sweeping sanctions against China, a dramatic shift from NATO's original mission. For countries like Germany and France, this would mean slashing domestic budgets and risking economic ties with China. Trump insists Europe must pay for its own defense and join America's economic battle with Beijing. The proposal transforms NATO from a regional defense pact into a global tool of U.S. policy, forcing allies to choose between Washington's demands and their own interests. European leaders now face a stark dilemma: comply and risk economic fallout, or resist and risk fracturing the alliance. President Trump's push to reshape NATO is driven by one overriding concern: the rapid and relentless rise of China as a global superpower. For decades, NATO's focus was on Russia and the security of Europe. But now, the Trump administration is determined to shift the alliance's attention eastward, seeing China as the defining challenge of the 21st century. In Washington, policymakers increasingly view China not just as a competitor in trade, but as a systemic rival, one whose growing partnership with Moscow threatens to upend the global balance of power. The deepening ties between Beijing and Moscow are seen as a direct challenge to American interests and Western values. The U.S. is urging NATO allies to join a coordinated economic confrontation, using powerful tools like tariffs and sanctions to curb China's technological ambitions, restrict its access to Western markets, and weaken Russia by extension. The goal is to create a united front that can push back against both countries' growing assertiveness. Trump's administration argues that only a truly united Western alliance, politically, economically, and militarily, can hope to contain China's expanding global influence. The stakes, they say, are nothing less than the future of the international order. To that end, the U.S. has proposed tariffs of up to 100% on a wide range of Chinese goods, aiming to cripple China's export-driven economy and force Beijing to change its behavior. These measures are designed to hit China where it hurts most, its manufacturing and trade sectors. At the same time, the U.S. sees China's ongoing support for Russia as a direct threat, especially as it helps fuel the war in Ukraine despite sweeping Western sanctions. This partnership is viewed as a dangerous axis that could destabilize regions far beyond Eastern Europe. By demanding more from NATO, Trump is seeking to shift the burden of global security and economic confrontation onto America's allies, insisting that they step up both militarily and economically in this new era of great power competition. The message is clear: U.S. protection now comes with strings attached. Allies are expected to align fully with American priorities, both in defense and in economic policy, if they want continued support. This marks a sharp break from the past, transforming long-standing alliances into more transactional relationships, where loyalty and cooperation are measured by tangible contributions and unwavering alignment with U.S. strategy. As the U.S. pressured Europe, China struck at America's doorstep with a $50 billion trade shock targeting Mexico. Chinese companies flooded Mexico with cheap goods, cars, steel, electronics, undercutting local and American producers. This dumping overwhelmed Mexican industries, creating a massive trade imbalance and threatening economic stability. In response, Mexico imposed steep tariffs on Chinese imports, trying to shield its economy from collapse. China's move exposed the vulnerability of U.S. supply chains and sent a warning to other nations. Economic confrontation with Beijing comes with real risks. The trade shock disrupted North American trade and highlighted how quickly global ties can become liabilities. For Mexico, the crisis forced a painful choice between protecting its industries and maintaining crucial trade relationships. China demonstrated it can weaponize its manufacturing power, reshaping the global economic landscape overnight. The flood of cheap Chinese goods hit Mexico's industries hard, threatening jobs and factory closures. Mexico's retaliatory tariffs offered some protection, but also raised prices for consumers and businesses, fueling inflation. Companies relying on Chinese components now face higher costs, risking their competitiveness in global markets. The trade dispute strained Mexico's ties with both China and the U.S., putting it in a precarious position. Washington may welcome Mexico's action, but economic instability south of the border could spark unrest and migration. Mexico's integration into global supply chains, once a strength, has become a liability in this era of great power rivalry. The crisis forces Mexican policymakers to rethink their economic strategy and dependence on any single partner. In today's world, economic relationships can quickly turn into weapons, leaving countries like Mexico caught in the crossfire. Trump's demands have plunged NATO into crisis, exposing deep rifts between the US and Europe. The alliance, once defined by unwavering solidarity, now faces unprecedented internal tensions. As leaders gather behind closed doors, the atmosphere is thick with suspicion and uncertainty about the future of transatlantic cooperation. The push for higher defense spending and sanctions on China is seen in Europe as serving American interests, not their own. Many European leaders feel pressured to prioritize Washington's agenda, even when it clashes with their domestic priorities and public opinion. For many European nations, China is a vital economic partner, and US-led sanctions could trigger devastating retaliation. European economies, already fragile from recent crises, fear the consequences of being caught in a superpower standoff that could threaten jobs and growth. The alliance's unity is fracturing, with European leaders questioning America's reliability and considering greater strategic autonomy. Some are openly debating whether Europe should chart its own course, independent of US influence, to better protect its interests. The transactional nature of US demands undermines decades of shared values and trust. What was once a partnership built on mutual respect now feels more like a series of negotiations, with each side calculating its own advantage. Talk of European independence is growing, as leaders seek to avoid being dragged into Washington's economic battles. Calls for a more self-reliant Europe are gaining traction, with some leaders advocating for new defense and economic strategies. A divided NATO weakens the West's ability to respond to threats from Russia or China. Without unity, the alliance's deterrence and collective defense are at risk, emboldening adversaries who sense opportunity in the discord. Trade wars and internal discord could leave both the US and Europe worse off, strengthening their rivals. Economic instability and political infighting threaten to erode the prosperity and security that the alliance once guaranteed. The campaign to unite the West may end up weakening it from within, as old alliances are tested and new divisions emerge. The choices made now will shape the future of the transatlantic partnership for years to come. The world is shifting from globalization to division. Competition, not cooperation, is the new norm. We're seeing the rise of rival blocs, one led by Washington, the other by Beijing. Global supply chains are breaking down, replaced by tariffs, fences, and strategic decoupling. For ordinary people, this means higher prices, fewer choices, and economic disruption as industries reorganize along political lines. International cooperation on global challenges, climate change, pandemics, nuclear threats, will become harder as distrust grows. Institutions like the UN and WTO risk paralysis, unable to bridge the widening divide. The risk of a full-blown economic Cold War is real, with alliances breaking and nations forced to fend for themselves. The era of building bridges is ending. The challenge now is to prevent new fences from becoming permanent walls.